Welcome to Talking Targaryen. Today we're talking about House of the Dragon Episode 2, titled The Rogue Prince. We did our instant take earlier in the week with our raw, immediate reactions to the episode, but today we're doing our full recap and analysis. Quick heads up, we will spoil everything through Episode 2, but no spoilers from any future episodes. So nothing from the Next Time On preview, and nothing from the book Fire and Blood. With that, I'm Gil.
I'm Daniel.
Let's get into it. First, Daniel, let's just start with overall thoughts on the episode. How did you feel about Episode 2? How does it compare to Episode 1? Are you still itching to see the next episodes of the series?
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. I'm getting increasingly excited about the show with each episode. And it's similarly to Episode 1. Like, after rewatching Episode 2, I'm even more excited about it. I think there's just so much interesting stuff going on. And there's a lot of depth to all of the characters. And there's a lot of really interesting conflict brewing. And so, yeah, I'm really excited. I think it's pretty awesome so far.
Yeah, I think I'll second pretty much everything you just said. I did say in the instant take that I'm intrigued by all the characters. I want to see what happens next. But at a certain point, usually a show will grab you where you feel that compulsion. I need to see what happens next. I'm not quite there yet. So it's sort of like, I'm really liking it. I haven't fallen in love with the show yet, but very solid and still very happy to be back in this world. So let's jump into the episode. And speaking of being back in the world, we start off with the opening. And as we discussed on the instant take, we've got the Game of Thrones theme back. And having had a few days of separation from your first reaction to it, having watched it again, what do you think of the opening?
Yeah, I mean, I found it even boring on the rewatch. I think, look, the music's cool. Gotta love that theme song. Still, we don't have Adam on, so there's nobody here to, rail about how much they hated Game of Thrones ending. So for me, look, the music doesn't scar me. I still enjoy the theme song. But the starting was just a little boring. Like, it wasn't as interesting as the original Game of Thrones starting, right, where we would get to see all the different geographies and everything. I get there's a lot of probably interesting symbolism and stuff in this new opening, but it's just like a little boring to watch.
It's a little bit visually repetitive.
Yeah.
It's like, blood poured into that circle, and now blood's pouring into this other circle.
I wonder if blood's going to pour into that circle. It did pour into it.
And basically what we're seeing there, each circle is a different Targaryen emblem representing a different member of the family. You'll even see the symbol on the necklace that Daemon gave to Rhaenyra in Episode 1. You see that symbol show up in the starting. I pretty much had the same reaction as you. I will say on second viewing, I tried paying a little bit more attention to the details of the actual model of Old Valyria, it seems, that the blood is running over. Tried paying attention to some of the details, and it did grow on me a bit. And there is some visually cool stuff like the blood waterfall and things like that. So I don't know, it might grow on us over time.
It could. And thematically, it makes a lot of sense, right? Blood is being very important to the Targaryens. Like, it's cool. It makes a lot of sense. And I'm excited about anything that has anything to do with Old Valyria. Like, that is just such a cool element of the lore. So yeah, maybe it'll grow on me.
Yeah, even when Viserys is talking to Alicent about how they were close to the volcano, the source of their magic and power. And I'm like, tell me more about that.
I took notes on everything he said in that scene. I was like, over 1,000 dragons, a navy that could span the globe. Like, this all sounds really cool.
Yeah, maybe they should have set the prequel during that time period.
Were there ever talks about doing that?
Well, there's a lot of prequels that have been discussed behind the scenes. I don't know how much detail we know about all of them. So I guess a long way of saying I don't know.
Yeah, my guess is probably not, just because Old Valyria, my assumption is Old Valyria is in all of his works, just like lore. Yeah. Like, I doubt it's fleshed out much, but...
And it would probably break the budget if you need to have 1,000 dragons. Anyway, let's get into the actual meat of the episode. And speaking of meat, we start off by seeing the meat being ripped out of people's body parts. So we see the work of the crab feeder finally, up close and personal. We see a crab eating a parallelogram out of a sailor's foot, as we discussed on the instant take. And then you zoom out and you see smoke. You see some people pillaging and others just screaming in pain. Not much to say on this, except Game of Thrones does violence really well. They always find creative new ways to show you people getting dismembered. I've never seen crabs eating someone before.
And what a unique choice too. I've never thought of crabs eating people before.
No.
Never occurred to me. There was also, I thought there was a really clever camera trick they did here as well. They did a close-up of a skull with like crabs coming in and out of the skull. So obviously you're looking at a dead person. But then the next cuts to a dead-looking foot. And then all of a sudden the foot moves.
Oh, and you see the guy's alive.
Yeah, so obviously they switched who they were pointing the camera at, but just what a clever trick to make you think you're looking at the same dead body. And then all of a sudden it moves. To me, that was like, it was really jarring.
Then we cut to a small council meeting where they're discussing the recent death of Sir Rhaenyra, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, who, by the way, I was like, who is this guy? He is in the first episode. You see him guarding various things. Just didn't leave much of an impression. So the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard is dead, died by illness in his sleep, and his remains are being prepared by the Silent Sisters. Now, you and I both get excited at any mention of lore. Did you look the Silent
I looked
Sisters
up the Silent Sisters, yeah.
Why don't you tell us about that?
So they work... Well, they're like part of the religious groups, right, within Westeros.
The Faith of the Seven,
Yes.
the dominant religion among the Seven Kingdoms.
And they specifically like pray to and follow the Stranger, who is basically death, but like and more things. And I don't think the Stranger is one of the seven.
Quick correction: the Stranger is one of the aspects of the seven, so it is one of the seven.
I apologize.
I pretty much stopped my research at they follow the Faith of the Seven, and they're a group that takes an order of chastity and silence and attend to the dead.
It's a myth that they actually have their tongues cut out. They do have their tongues, but they just don't speak. And I think they walk around basically covered except for their eyes. And it's very bad luck to like make eye contact with them because it's like you're looking at death. And their responsibility is basically to deal with dead bodies.
So they've invited some candidates to take Sir Ryan's place. Who is going to be strong enough to fill those shoes? But before they can get too far into that conversation, Corlys storms in. 2 issues. 1, the Stepstones have gone to hell, and one of his ships was lost. So the ports are being beggared.
Completely beggared.
He wants to seize the Stepstones by force. But Viserys, of course, doesn't want to go to war with the Free Cities, who are financing the operation. The other issue, why do they feel so comfortable doing this? The crown is no longer feared or respected. Daemon has taken over a Dragonstone and fortified it with his army of gold cloaks. A Dragonstone is a castle on an island called Dragonstone. And it was the original seat of House Targaryen, but Daemon has decided to take it for himself. Rhaenyra butts in at a certain point and suggests they go in with dragons as a show of force. And noticing that Rhaenyra wants to be involved, Viserys kind of, does a sort of pat her on the head. Why don't you go pick out the new Kingsguard?
Yeah, but one interesting element to that, though, is that's not Viserys' initial reaction. Viserys somewhat engages with her. He's like, look, it's not that simple. And then it's the Hand who initially suggests, let's find some busy work for her.
Right, Otto says something like, might her talents be more useful elsewhere? So Otto guiding the situation as always. And Rhaenyra is clearly frustrated. So this is 6 months later, we should say it. That gets established throughout the episode that basically 6 months have passed since Rhaenyra was named the new heir. And clearly she's frustrated that she's the heir. She theoretically will be queen one day, but really nothing has changed.
She's still the cupbearer.
As Rhaenys will point out later. And this is her wanting to show, I'm smart, I have good ideas, let me get involved. Is she right, though? Is that a good idea, sending dragons into the Stepstones?
It's not a horrible idea. I mean, they were attacked, right? Westeros was attacked. Do you sail into the storm or do you sail around it?
Right, as Corlys will say at a certain point this episode. I think I said this on the instant take. You do see throughout this episode that Rhaenyra does know more than others will probably assume. And she'll say some pretty smart things, but I think you do also see some signs of her being a little naive and not. Maybe she's like playing light chess, but she's not fully seeing 6 moves ahead yet. I think we'll see examples of that later. And also, so on that, maybe it is right to send in a dragon, but is she thinking about the implications of that? You send in dragons, potentially now you're starting a war.
Yeah, I'm sure Viserys has in mind like all these different complicated political implications, right? And then he has his, what do you call each of the chair people in the small council? Minister of Finance or something?
Oh, yeah.
He's the master of coin. Master of coin.
That's right.
The master of coin points out it's expensive, right? Like there are all these things to consider. But I do think Rhaenyra probably has a point that, look, she and everyone else are more aggressive than Viserys. Like Viserys, we just see time and time again, it seems, is just not aggressive enough. And he doesn't show enough strength.
Definitely. Yeah, I'd say she's more right than him, but has she weighed all the variables? Yeah. I'm not sure. But Rhaenyra goes to pick out a new Kingsguard. And she's pretty bored, you can tell at first. Or not necessarily bored, but put off and unimpressed. She's put off by all the candidates' lack of actual combat experience. Until she very quickly picks out Sir Criston Cole, who is the only one with combat experience and also happens to be the most handsome. But he's the mysterious knight we met in the first episode of Dornish Descent, though as you and I clarified to ourselves, he's of Dornish descent on at least some part of his family, but he belongs to House Cole of the Stormlands. Specifically, he fought in the Dornish Marches, which again, that's a region in the Stormlands, which is north of Dorne.
And this is an area that often suffers incursions from the Dornish.
Right.
Making the houses there very important.
Yes.
Because they defend against the Dornish incursions.
Exactly. And that's who he was fighting. So
he was fighting on behalf of those houses.
Exactly.
Against the Dorne.
Against the Dorne. So Otto advises that there is a political angle here where some of the knights that are candidates belong to houses who would make good allies, or it'd be important to keep good relations with them. So there's a whole political angle to this that she doesn't really want to hear about at all. But the most important thing is we get a knight that can actually protect us who has combat experience. And you can see in the distance, Rhaenys, the queen who never was, is kind of watching all of this go down. Any thoughts on that scene?
I was just going to say, kind of a low bar, right? Criston Cole has like a year of combat experience. He did a good job. He like raised 2 watchtowers. That's why he got knighted. But like clearly they're not choosing from like that great of a selection, which I guess is kind of the point, is that there's very few people in this world with with real fighting experience.
Right, and we heard that in the first episode at the tourney, where they were saying these are all green knights.
They're like summer children.
That's right. So, so when war comes, it's going to be interesting. Assuming it does eventually.
It's gotta.
I liked in this scene the little detail of her standing on that box so she can stand proudly over the railing. And I think this is one of those examples I mentioned earlier where you do potentially see that she's a little naive to some of the realities of this world. Where once again, I'm not saying she made the wrong choice picking out Cole, but when she's weighing the options, did she consider the political angle and then make the calculation, combat experience, someone strong, outweighs the political implications? Or is she just totally ignoring them?
You know, it's interesting also when they present the first knight and his accolades, there's silence. And the hand mentions to Rhaenyra, you might thank him for his, loyal service. And then she does it. It's just interesting. She's been raised in the Red Keep in this environment, and she doesn't know these sort of like, I guess, standard things you're supposed to do as part of the royalty. Like, that's just interesting. And maybe that's partly how she hasn't really been in the fold. She's not being taught the things she needs to be taught. But also maybe it's part of like Viserys. Maybe it's also just Viserys, not keeping her in the fold, not teaching her all the things that she needs to know if she is eventually going to be a ruler.
Right. She may not have been, I'm assuming she's been treated as royalty her whole life, but I guess there is a difference between being the heir versus being the kind of, some would look at her as a disappointment because she's a daughter and everyone wants Viserys to have a son, right? An obvious heir. So I think she's definitely experiencing a new level of royalty now.
Yeah.
Then we see Viserys and Alicent speaking, once again near his model, which is very far along now. I think this episode gives a lot of little visual cues and in conversation drop little things to make sure you understand the amount of time that's passed.
By the way, so this scene starts, I think, with Viserys explaining to Alicent that, or like she comments how impressive the model is, right? And how he has the stonemasons make it. He just pores over the textbooks. Have they not been meeting in his chambers the last 6 months? How has it not come up? It just occurred to me, how did it not previously come up how he builds this model?
Right, or she's been slowly watching it come together for months, and only once it's completely done, she's like, wow, you built all this?
Or maybe they just have that same conversation every time she's in his chambers.
Well, he gives her a sort of tour of the model, and this is where we get some of those cool details. 1,000 dragons, it's built near the volcano. And in this conversation, we learn that Rhaenyra, Viserys' daughter, is not speaking to him much these days. And he's afraid to be the one to go to her. You know, he'd rather face the Black Dread himself than his own daughter of 15. Another little clue to us how much time has passed, right? Last time we saw her, she was 14. And Alicent thinks that Rhaenyra would open up if Viserys were to approach her. And he gets kind of nervous and he asks, you don't mention these talks to Rhaenyra, do you? And I'm afraid she wouldn't really understand them. And I'd say a lot of great acting for Alicent this episode, just with her face. Because she has to be very measured in speaking with Viserys. This is the king. But her face says everything. When he says, you don't mention her talks to Rhaenyra, I'm not sure if she would understand them, you can see the discomfort on Alicent's face, right?
Yeah, and I think also a lot of sort of just confusion from her too, right? Because I think everybody watching her, you can tell this is obviously really uncomfortable for her. But there's also like confusion, I think, for us and for her of like, what does this mean, right? Because this relationship isn't like, she clearly has some amount of affection for the king. Obviously, I don't think.
I think it's two different sorts of affection here.
But like but even coming from Viserys also, a lot of it does seem like a very genuine emotional connection between the two of them. So there is something real in their relationship, but there's also obviously a lot of weirdness to it and confusion. And then they have that moment of probably one-sided sexual tension or maybe both-sided awkwardness when they touch hands, or like both of them look very uncomfortable about it. So the whole thing is just so confusing. And I think Alicent, like the actress, did a really good job of showing that confusion.
Yeah, and I think trying to pick apart the variables at play, I think from Alicent, we know that Otto is the one who put her up to going to see Viserys. And we'll talk a little bit more about why he did that later in this conversation. But once she's in the room, I do think that she genuinely sympathizes with Viserys because he lost his wife. She recently lost her mother. I think if it were up to her, she might not want to come back and see him again, or at least not as frequently. But once she's in there and dealing with him, like you said, I think there is genuine affection and genuine sympathy.
Yeah, and the other thing too is it's rare in this show, and I think in this world generally, to see two people share their emotions with each other, right? Like, what's the only other relationship currently where we see that? It would be between Rhaenyra and Alicent, right? And they... we'll talk about it in the next scene, but they also, it's hard for them to be as close now that she's so close with Viserys, right? So in a way that relationship is strengthening over time to the detriment of other relationships that she has. And so it is, similarly like with her father, she can't talk about her emotions or anything, right? So you could see how maybe over time this does become an important relationship in some ways.
And I think, to your point, you don't often see people talk about their emotions like this in this world. The other thing you don't often see, at least with Viserys, is someone who will speak to him without ulterior motives. There is an ulterior motive, but it's not from Alicent. She genuinely, like I said, I think sympathizes with him, shows him kindness. So it's easy to see, again, looking at this world through the morals of their time and alternate reality, it's easy to see why he would fall for her. It's probably the only female he deals with that speaks to him in a genuine and intelligent way and shows him that kind of kindness. Then, like you said, then we see Alicent and Rhaenyra in the Sept. And Rhaenyra is annoyed that there's already talk of her father remarrying and potentially replacing her as his heir if he has more children. She mentions how it's only been half a year since her mother died. Again, a nice little signpost to tell us how much time has passed. And Alicent gives her some comfort, saying, "Your father loves you. He chose you for his heir." And she replies, "He didn't choose me. He spurns Daemon." And that's an interesting point. We talked about that last episode. Ultimately, why did Viserys make the decision to pick her as his heir? And some of it could be genuinely thinking, this whole time, it's been staring me in the face. She should be the heir. But part of it might also be, F you, Daemon. I do think it's more the former. Alicent asks Rhaenyra to pray with her. And as they silently pray, Rhaenyra sort of starts to cry and says, "I want him to see me as more than his little girl." And then Alicent advises her that if she wants to speak with her father, she needs to be the one to go to him. And it's kind of funny how this episode feels very back and forth. It's kind of, here's Viserys' point of view. My daughter won't talk to me. Here's her point of view. My father won't talk to me. It was nice to see the two different points of view. Any other thoughts on this scene, Daniel?
Yeah, well, I think these two scenes, especially back to back, were really interesting. In particular, I think it highlights a lot about Alicent in that, she is encouraging Viserys to reach out to Rhaenyra, and she's encouraging Rhaenyra to reach out to Viserys, to her father. And later on, we see that she's effective in doing it, right? Like she does. Initially, she bridges the gap between the two of them. She gets them to open up to each other, and she knows how to communicate that with both of them. And I thought that was so interesting. It shows that she has like incredibly high emotional intelligence.
Right.
Like she's very perceptive, and she really knows how to influence both these people in a really positive way here. Where like this to me seems like benevolent, where like she's really trying to strengthen the relationship, whereas everybody else, including her father, is probably trying to, isolate Viserys. And of course, ultimately that ends up happening because of Alicent. But I think that's just so interesting. It sets her character up in a really cool way.
You could imagine a scenario where she realizes that she was sort of used as a tool by her father, and that starts to make her angry. And then she uses her EQ to start manipulating people. She would be really good at it.
Well, and I'm sure she must be aware, right, of how she's being used, but also might not understand what she's being used for exactly.
Right. And what do you think about the fact that Viserys is sort of protecting Rhaenyra? Is it purely in the sense that he's not giving her much responsibility? He's leaving her as the cupbearer. And I imagine that it's a little bit of a conflict where on one hand, he wants to protect her and, she's his daughter. He makes a comment later, I always forget how grown up you are. And on the other hand, maybe he does see her as the true heir. If he has more children and he has sons, would he replace her? Or does in his mind, is she going to be queen one day?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, from Rhaenyra's perspective, she just thinks that Viserys keeps looking at her like she's a little girl, right? And so for her, maybe it just feels like he doesn't recognize that I'm grown up and I can handle like the responsibility of learning how to be heir and eventually king. Yeah, I don't know. Do you think it's all... one part of it could also be for him that it's just also so uncomfortable for him to raise her as an heir when that's not what she was before, right? And it's also a woman's never been, slated to be on the Iron Throne before. It might just be some discomfort around that, and also fear because all the people around him aren't going to be happy with it. But it seems genuine from him that he does plan for her to be heir.
Right. Yeah, it might be in his mind. He keeps saying, once she hits a certain age, once she's grown up, I'll start to give her more responsibility and bring her into the fold. And he just probably kicks that can down the road all the time. She's still my little girl. But we'll see. I wonder
if having, now lost his wife and feeling so isolated, he also probably wants to like hold on to her, right? And keep her close.
Right. Yeah.
Right. He does say he's very scared of losing her.
Yeah. Doesn't want them to become estranged. So Viserys meets with Rhaenys and Corlys in the garden. So to show the realm that the crown is stable and not vulnerable, Corlys advises that Viserys quickly remarry. Who should he marry? His daughter, Laena. That would unite the two great surviving houses of Valyria. And Viserys mentions, it hasn't even been half a year since Emma passed. So in case you...
So it's about 6 months, is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Viserys and Rhaenyra, unless you have anything else on that scene.
Well, an aggressive move by Corlys, but well within the station, as somebody else will comment on later. Yeah, nothing else on that scene. I mean, Viserys looks really weak again in this scene
Yeah.
of the way, Corlys is very aggressive to him in the small council meeting. And then Viserys sets up this meeting to say, hey, I hope it's clear our families are still friends with one another.
Right.
Just a little weak.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to unpack in Corlys's maneuver here and how Viserys responds to it, but we'll kind of discuss that as we go through the rest of the episode. So we see Viserys and Rhaenyra at dinner, and at first Rhaenyra tries to start a conversation. We haven't spoken much since, and they open up a little bit. Viserys talks about how much he loved her mother. The conversation doesn't go very far, and then when Rhaenyra brings up the small council, the whole we should go in with dragons thing, Viserys kind of cuts her off and says, "You're young, you will learn." And you can easily see why Rhaenyra is frustrated and feels like she's being treated as a little girl, because essentially what Viserys is saying there with "you're young" is that your idea was 100% wrong. You shouldn't have even suggested it, rather than going into the nuances of heading in the right direction, Rhaenyra, but here's what would happen if we went in with dragons. Here's why we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, it's you will learn instead of, well, let's learn right now.
Exactly.
Why not explain to me what was wrong with my suggestion?
Right, exactly. So Viserys, his pinky wound that we saw him get last episode from the Iron Throne is getting worse. So they're treating it with maggots, who will hopefully remove the dead flesh and stop the advancement of the rot. And while they're at it, Viserys asks for advice on the marriage proposal. Otto essentially advises against it. He says, "I recently lost my lady wife, and to be compelled to replace her for duty's sake, I do not envy you." So in a not so subtle way saying, maybe you shouldn't do that. The Maester, he can't even understand the emotional side of it. Viserys is like, what would Rhaenyra think? Maester just cuts him off and he's like, what does it matter? It's just, you'll be reuniting the two strongest houses. It'll show the realm that we're strong. So just your logic is sound. Very Vulcan of him.
I really liked the writing in this scene. Mm-hmm. I think there's everybody on the small council. It's just really cool when you can see the gears turning in their head of they're trying to figure out, okay, what do I tell the king? Right? Where the Maester makes this good argument for why he should marry the Lady Laena and Laena, right?
Yeah.
And then the Hand, he responds with just, Grand Maester's reasoning is sound. Right? He can't attack the reasoning head on because it is sound. But then later in the conversation, he does that, I don't envy your position. Right? And then he just tugs on the heartstrings.
Exactly. He can't make an intellectual argument, but he can push the emotions that he knows are already there. And we're talking about Otto. Let's talk about his angle here a little bit. We were all very grossed out and creeped out when he told Alicent to wear her mother's dress and go visit Viserys. I think in retrospect, he did not intend for her to go in there. He was not expecting anything physical to happen that night. But he knew that Viserys was at his most emotionally vulnerable. He needed a shoulder to cry on, so he sent in a beautiful shoulder. And he knew that over time, he could get Viserys to fall in love with his daughter. He says later in the episode, the Lionel Strong, Master of Law.
Yeah.
He says that Corlys will be unhappy with anything less than a direct line to the Iron Throne. And I think we can probably say the same thing for Otto. Otto wants Viserys to fall for his daughter, and that gives him that direct line. Any other thoughts on this scene, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, Otto, after the first episode, I didn't think that Otto had that much tact, right? I felt like his moves were a little sloppy. Now, in retrospect, I mean, it seems like he's angling pretty well. Right, his move with building that relationship between Alicent and Viserys is working extremely well. And even in that meeting between him and the Maester and Viserys, I thought it was really clever the way he didn't intellectually argue against the marriage because he knew that would be playing his hand too overtly, especially when there's really no good intellectual argument against it. He knows when to just tug on the heartstrings instead, which is kind of his his permanent strategy with Viserys.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because we were complimenting his daughter for understanding emotions and being able to help people, and it's almost like Otto has that same understanding, but he uses it for evil.
So we don't know. We don't know if his ends are evil yet, right?
Yeah, I guess I'm using the term evil there as almost synonymous with Machiavellian, or just he's playing chess to his own ends.
He's being manipulative, for sure.
Right, which is, in this world, that's to be expected.
Yeah.
Viserys goes on a walk with the Lady Laena, getting to know his potential soon-to-be wife.
And the reaction, right? I think none of us Maybe if you followed episode 1 closely, you would know who Laena was, but I think none of us knew what to expect. And then when it first shows her and you're like, oh, wow. Okay, she is really young.
And even if you know what to expect, just the cut to seeing somebody that short next to Viserys, you're just like, oh yeah, this is, yep.
So uncomfortable.
Yeah. We did see Laena very briefly in episode 1 at the tournament. She's in the audience. So she basically says everything her father trained her to say. Our marriage will be great. I will have many children for you. And then she says what he asks, what does your mother say? And she's like, I will not have to bed you till I'm 14.
Yeesh.
In the conversation, they also discuss Vhagar. Am I pronouncing that right?
I think so.
The only other dragon besides Balerion, the Black Dread. So this is the only other dragon who saw old Valyria. Vhagar's been missing, and there are only rumors about where she is. And this is something the show does. Some people were not happy with the exposition. I actually think exposition's been done pretty well in both episodes. And this is an example of that. There's so many scenes where there's a primary purpose. So the primary reason we're watching this scene is to see Viserys and Laena talk about their potential marriage. But many of these scenes have a secondary purpose, just seeding some information that gives context, like it's been half a year since Emma died, or giving information that could be useful in the future. So I assume this could just be an interesting piece of world building, but also this dragon may come into play later.
Yeah, I mean, a loose dragon, a loose, powerful dragon that's too large for the dragon pit feels like a useful plot device to come in handy at some point.
Exactly. So Rhaenyra is watching all this happen. Her father speaking with Laena, and Rhaenys is watching Rhaenyra watching. And then the two of them talk. So Rhaenys observes that Rhaenyra is bothered by her father remarrying, and Rhaenys promises that, your father's going to have more kids. Some of them are going to be male, and the realm will want them to be heir over you. Men will sooner burn down the realm than let a woman ascend the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra doesn't seem to exactly believe her. She essentially accuses the queen who never was of projecting. They passed over you, but it doesn't mean they're passing over all women. And Rhaenyra promises that when she's queen, she will create a new order. Now, I mentioned earlier in this conversation, I think we see some signs of Rhaenyra being a little naive. And I think technically that's true here. She may be a little naive in terms of the ways of the world. I'm sure she understands the persecution and the way women are looked at in this world, but she's almost naive in a helpful way, where Rhaenys feels like she's wise and she understands the true order, and in her mind that order cannot be changed. But here, being a little fresher in this world, Rhaenyra believes it can be changed, which gives her the ability to try and change it. So in a sense, it kind of shows you the positive side of being a little less experienced.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more Rhaenyra just seems a little more determined and optimistic, and Rhaenys is just kind of bitter and old, right?
Right. She hasn't been... Rhaenys has been beaten down by the world. Rhaenyra hasn't. And maybe when Rhaenyra goes toe-to-toe with the realm, she'll win. If anyone read Fire and Blood, don't tell me.
And one other interesting thing I was thinking about in this scene was, in the first episode, close to our first experience with Rhaenyra, she talks about how she doesn't really want to be on the throne. She just wants to travel the world on dragonback. But in this scene, she's clearly wants to be on the Iron Throne, right? She gets defensive with Rhaenys, right? Basically saying, no, like I will, like people bent the knee to me, right? And she seems proud of that. And I was wondering, like, when did she start actually wanting to sit on the throne? Now, half a year has passed, right? So it could have happened any time in that period. But the other thing I was thinking about is, well, she's also only 15, right? So her desires and her identity are nowhere near set in stone, right? Just being made heir is going to make her want to be on the throne over time. And so it's going to be interesting just to watch her sort of thirst for power grow over time.
It's also possible that she didn't necessarily know it was a possibility. When she said the whole eat cake thing, that was at a time where the queen that never was, she was obviously passed over, and there was no talk, no serious talk that Rhaenyra was aware of that she would be the genuine next heir to the throne, right? So it could just be, well, this is a possibility. We also see her in the first episode, besides the I want to eat cake thing, she says to her mother that she would rather go into the battlefield and fight. So I would actually say, I think I want to fly on dragon back with you, that was more flippant and kind of joking around. And this desire to be on the throne, it may not have always manifested as I want to be on the throne, but that kernel was there before.
Yeah, I mean, she clearly was always fairly proactive, right? We see her in episode 1 just wanting to have a lot of agency in things. And then, of course, even more so in episode 2. So, yeah, it doesn't seem out of character for her to want to sit on the throne.
Yeah. Rhaenys, by the way, also says, your father is no fool, after her whole pitch about how, you don't know the true order of things. So I think what the queen essentially is saying is, if your father has children and some of them are sons, he will replace you as heir.
Well, and more than that, I think she's saying he is going to find a way to have some sons to replace you.
Yeah, exactly. And we kind of already touched on, I am very curious to answer to that. I think if you were to ask Viserys right now, he would say, she's the true heir. I don't care if I have other kids. I know the realm's going to put pressure on me, but she's the true heir. But we see that he is not the strongest person. So that could change, when faced with that immense pressure.
But also, how much time does he even have, right? He has this new wound, right? Now, I guess maybe he could have, 9 months, 10 months from now, he could have a baby boy, and maybe that's sufficient to replace her as heir. But, that would...
And he doesn't have to survive those 9 months, right? They just have to have a son on the way.
I guess so. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure that Rhaenyra would have something to say about that, and it'd be pretty messy, I assume.
Yeah.
And very possible. We'll see. Next, we see Viserys and Alicent. He's still whining about having to marry Laena. He says, he's saying, that's what they want me to do. And Alicent says all the right things. Remarrying's going to be great. I'm sure she's going to be kind. She's going to be awesome. I'm sure she'll enjoy your company, as I have. Camera cuts to her ripping her fingers apart.
What an uncomfortable line to say.
Yeah. Again, she's saying what she knows that she needs to say.
But also, I wonder if part of the anxiety, I'm only now thinking this, is, she must understand her purpose there to some extent. Mm-hmm. This is also her failing, potentially. Right? Like if Viserys goes and marries somebody else and she understands what her father's intentions were here, she's failing.
Right. And I think, so there's a few ways to interpret that. Another way to interpret it is, he's marrying someone else. And you're saying that, but from a I'm failing perspective, it could also be from an I'm in love with you perspective. I was hoping you'd marry me. And I think that's how Viserys is interpreting it.
Yeah.
Because he definitely looks down and sees it. And I think he's realizing, she's not happy with me marrying Laena. And I'll also say we are surmising all of Alicent's thoughts based off of her facial expressions and just what seems obvious. Like, of course, you wouldn't want to marry him, but we're making a lot of assumptions. I am curious to learn more about how I'm assuming her feelings are fairly complicated.
Yeah, I think we barely know her still. I mean, all these characters, right? We've spent so little time with them, and I think they're all pretty complex. The other thing that was funny is that, they show us her nervous tick so much. Mm-hmm. Is she the only character with a nervous tick? Yeah. Like, are nervous ticks, like picking at your nails or whatever, like that uncommon? Like, maybe they're more uncommon in their world because they have to hide everything. But I feel like, I don't know, picking at your cuticles or whatever doesn't seem like that extreme of a thing. It would be this apparent.
It does feel like, it almost feels like it's set up for something because they do draw so much attention to it. Like, maybe at some point we'll see her, she starts wearing gloves. Like, her fingers are just, I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, and it's just funny, too, that it's like one of the main devices they have for like sort of showing us what Alicent is feeling with us still like not really understanding.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But all of this is interrupted when Otto shows up. And there's actually a little detail I enjoy here where Viserys is talking in his normal voice. And then when there's a knock at the door, he's like, come. He has to put on his king voice.
He has to put on the king voice. That
Looks
was so
like
funny.
You and I getting ready to podcast. Otto comes in as an emergency. So they come to this small council emergency session and learn that Prince Daemon, the rogue prince, has stolen a dragon egg and left a missive. And he calls himself in this letter the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. He's taken a second wife, Mysaria. She is with child and is to have a dragon's egg placed in the babe's cradle. And of course, King Viserys is invited to their wedding in 2 days. Rhaenyra asks which egg he took, and it's the one that was intended for Prince Baelon, her brother. So Viserys gets pretty annoyed. He says, I'll go get him. I'll go get it back myself. It's actually funny because at first he says, we shouldn't even respond to this. Daemon is just trying to get a rise out of us. And then as soon as he finds out which egg he took, he stands up. He's like, I'm going to go myself. So he immediately lets the emotion take over. But Otto says that he'll go in his stead. Otto prepares to leave, and he asks Alicent if she's going to see the king tonight, Viserys. And she, of course, says, if you wish it. I'm not sure anything. So people mentioned it's odd that we don't see that happen. He says you're going to see the king tonight. We kind of skip over that. And I think the reason is there's not really anything special going on here other than to remind us that he's pulling the strings. And he once again mentions her habit of picking at her fingers. And then he heads out with Kristen Cole and 20 guards. So he meets with Otto in Dragonstone. Otto meets with Daemon in Dragonstone, and Otto immediately comes out swinging, just insulting Daemon, demanding the egg back,
demanding that he banishes his whore. Pretty aggressive language.
Yeah, that's right. He's Otto warns Viserys. Otto agrees. He says he's gonna go, as if he's the better choice to deal with Daemon, even though we already know from the first episode that Otto and Daemon have a tendency to yank each other's chains. Also, Daemon's first question is just, where's the king? I don't see him here. Insults quickly escalate to physical threats. The men draw their swords until Daemon's dragon appears. And Otto's like, let's put your steel away.
Are we allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, go for it.
So I love Otto's line of sheathe the fucking steel.
Yeah.
Such a cool line. So okay, this is why before I was asking, what do you think Otto's angle is here when he decides to go instead of Viserys? He's going to go confront a Targaryen with a dragon, without a dragon on his side. What's the plan here?
He may have just thought Daemon is weak, Daemon is stupid. I can just walk in there and get the egg back. And it's not a good idea to have Viserys go because Viserys is so easily manipulated. I'm manipulating him constantly. Maybe it's just best to leave him at the throne and reduce the number of variables going into his head.
But the weird thing is, right, like Otto comes in swinging, right, with these insults. Like it felt very obvious this was going to potentially escalate to violence. Like had Rhaenyra not shown up with her dragon, what happens here? You really think Otto didn't think there was going to be violence?
Yeah, it seemed to me that there's no question there was going to be violence there. I don't know if all the men would have gotten burned because I think Daemon I don't think he knows exactly what he's doing here. I don't think this is a calculated move. I think this was primarily, I want to piss off the king.
Yeah, I think Daemon's prodding and he wanted the king to come out and, he just wants his brother.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So I don't know if he wanted to commit mass murder here, but I do think there was going to be physical violence.
Yeah, and maybe Otto's perceptive enough to know that as well, that like Daemon's not going to have his dragon burn all of us alive.
Yeah.
Unlikely outcome. And then again, Otto's the hand, like he kind of has to do this. He can't let the king go on his own.
Yeah, I think that's all completely right. And like you alluded to, Rhaenyra shows up riding Syrax, her dragon, and walks up to Daemon, basically says, you're in my castle, because this is supposed to be her castle when she comes of age. And she calls out, she pretty quickly susses out that he's not really getting married, and Mysaria is not really pregnant. And she storms off Mysaria because she was not aware of this lie. And Rhaenyra intimidates Daemon, saying, you want to be heir? You're going to have to kill me, so do it. I love that move. Anytime someone pulls a gun on you and you're like, you don't have the guts to do it. And Daemon basically skulks off, tosses her the dragon egg.
So how does Rhaenyra get to be this, like, wise? Like, how does she call Daemon out so easily?
I think it's a combination of some people are wise, right? Some people pay attention and they learn. And I think when she's cupbearer and she's pouring drinks, she's listening. Also, though, she knows Daemon.
Yeah.
She and Daemon clearly have they don't have an antagonistic relationship. I think in the instant take, I accidentally referred to them as brother and sister because it so feels like a brother-sister relationship. And it's kind of easy to see how they would connect with each other. Both of them feel sort of looked over by their father. Again, I keep thinking of his brother and his sister. Daemon, it feels looked over by Viserys, his brother, and she feels kind of misunderstood by him. So you could see how they would sort of bond over that. So I think it's a combination of being a little wiser than her years, but on top of that, she knows Daemon better than anyone, so she could easily suss out that he was bluffing. On top of that, if Daemon's going to listen to anyone, it's going to be her. So I think this is one point in the episode where you can see how smart she is, and this was the right move. Like her showing up on her dragon avoided any bloodshed. And I also, by the way, just want to call out, I loved the way her dragon showed up, where you just see the clouds parting, and it's what's going on here, and then she shows up. Back in the castle, Mysaria is upset and is back in Daemon's castle. Dragonstone, that's right. Mysaria is upset with him for putting her in danger, and she gives a whole speech about how she came to him to be liberated. And he's like, liberated from what? And she says, fear.
Lame scene. I thought it was a super lame scene.
Yeah, I agree. I saw the look on her face, and from what I'm seeing, reading a couple of reviews, that a lot of people feel that way. Because it just feels like, okay, so on the face of it, Sonoya Mizuno, great actress. We loved her on Devs. And on that alone, I'm intrigued by her character, and I like the fact that they're trying to develop her character. But so far, this is kind of the one moment of quote-unquote character development we've seen. And it's just odd in a couple of ways, because if you don't want to be afraid, I understand hitching your wagon to somebody in royalty, someone powerful. But Daemon is so volatile and power-hungry, and that's really the only way we've seen him. He upsets a lot of people. So I'm thinking, if you want to be safe, I would not want to be anywhere near that guy. Now, maybe he wasn't always like that. You know, you can think, maybe I can kind of twist my brain to see it from her perspective, but it's just hard to see it just based off of what we know about Daemon and how we've come to know him. And there's also, I gotta mention the accent. So after the first episode, a lot of people were talking about this accent she was putting on. And I didn't really notice it the first episode, but here where she has a lot of dialogue, like uninterrupted dialogue, I did honestly find it a little distracting because you just can't really place the accent. And it sounds like somebody trying to do an accent and not doing it quite right. So I did find it slightly distracting.
So the thing I did like in this scene was the way, generally I just like Daemon. I think he's like fun to watch on screen, right? He acts again like such a child in this scene, right? Mm-hmm. And she's very belittling to him of like, you told them all this stuff? Like you made up all this stuff? Like it's ridiculous. And I thought that relationship of theirs worked out well. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, she's saying, you know, this could get me killed. And he's like sulking, looking down. He's like, they wouldn't hurt you or whatever. He said something like that. And it's like, he's just acting like a child.
Yeah. Which I think is very fitting for Daemon, right? That's how people see him. And I kind of see him like that. So yeah, I don't want to belabor the scene. I'll just say, I still want to see more from her character, and I hope they give her more to do. But so far, yeah, just not my favorite scene in the episode.
And by the way, I just checked my notes to see the exact line he says. He kind of looks down and he goes, "No one will harm you," which is like kind of a strong line theoretically of like, you know, I can declare no one will harm you. But he says it like a child without any real good reason to be saying it.
Right.
Classic Daemon.
So that night, Viserys seeks some more advice about the marriage. He's waiting for someone to tell him what he wants to hear. Besides Otto, I guess. And he approaches, like we mentioned earlier, Lord Lionel Strong. So Viserys tells him how he's always noticed Corlys staring at him in envy. And essentially saying that Corlys has an angle here too. This is not a kindness of his heart or just looking out for the realm. Hey, our two families should combine. This is also Corlys wanting to get that direct line to the Iron Throne. So Viserys asks Strong, what if I reject his proposal? Strong says he wouldn't take it well. Nothing short of a direct line to the Iron Throne would satisfy him. Strong also warns that if they go to war with the Stepstones, they're going to need ships. And Corlys, the sea snake, controls half the ships in the realm. And Viserys says, no way he'd withhold ships over this if we really needed them.
Maybe foreshadowing.
I agree with that. Now, the kind of TLDR, Lionel Strong sort of sums it up. Corlys has made a fair play. It's a calculated reach, and he essentially succeeded. Viserys should wed Laena.
And poor Viserys, nobody is telling him what he wants to hear, which is, you don't need to marry her, it's fine.
Yeah, I meant to say it earlier, but very Robb Stark vibes here. When he broke the marriage pact, and that's what caused the Red Wedding. Man, nobody ever learns.
And by the way, I love the start of this scene. Viserys walks in and says to the Master of Laws, to Lionel, I have come looking for an unencumbered opinion. Lionel responds, that's all I would ever give you, your grace. Like, it's just so funny. Like, obviously, there's nowhere he can go for that. It's just, everything is just so political.
I kind of love the Lionel Strong character. There's something about the way that character is portrayed that I really enjoy. He has this sort of like droll to him, this kind of like, of course I would never do that, Viserys.
I think this is the same character that Adam on our last podcast mentioned, that he kind of looks dopey, so people underestimate him, but he's actually very shrewd, which I'm sure we'll see more of.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing too is I just loved his phrasing of Corlys's marriage proposal being a calculated reach, but fair play for a man of his position. Like, it's just so cool to frame it all as like a game.
Yeah, like he made a move against you, and you can't blame him for it. So
it's a fair move.
Yeah, I enjoyed this scene. And this is about the part of the episode where I almost started to get frustrated. Not frustrated with the show, but frustrated with the Viserys character, where I do see him, he does give me slight Ned Stark vibes, where it's somebody that seems like they want to do the right thing and doesn't want to take aggressive moves against anybody. But with Ned Stark, there was something really gratifying about seeing him stand up for what he believes in, while everything else in the realm is just awful. But with Viserys, it just feels like I'm watching him kind of flail uselessly, and he feels so weak in a way that's probably going to get maybe himself and others killed. And so that's not, again, I'm not criticizing the show, but it does possibly feed into what I said last week or earlier this week, where there aren't any characters that I'm just emphatically rooting for yet. To some extent, Rhaenyra, but one reason why I don't find myself being like, you go, Viserys, is because he does seem like, I want to see him do something unequivocally correct.
Well, he's just not even really doing much, right? Like, he's the king, but he's not really making any important decisions, or at least he makes a few decisions, right? He makes the decision to, do the C-section on his wife. And then at the end of this episode, he makes the decision to marry Alicent. But like, first of all, these decisions don't seem like great. And they also don't feel like they're even really his decisions, because we're seeing everything from the angle of all these people manipulating him. And so it makes it just frustrating to watch him, because you kind of like him, like you do kind of care about him, but he's not being like a protagonist. Like, he's not being a main character making strong decisions.
Right. And the Alicent decision that to some extent isn't his own, to the other extent, it is his own, but it's a very emotional decision.
And it's a cringeworthy decision too.
Is it now? I do wonder, so he does mention here that Corlys has been staring at him with envy. There is an argument to be made that not giving Corlys what he wants could be be the right move. It could be one chess move in a series of chess moves.
Yeah, well, look, nothing but a direct line to the Iron Throne will satisfy him. And I was wondering about that. Like, is his daughter being married to Viserys even a direct line to the Iron Throne? Like, not exactly. I guess it unifies their houses. So that's true. Okay, I guess that's like a direct line, but he's not going to be king.
Right.
So I do wonder, like, might he only be satisfied as king? And so, look, you got to just cut him off, and you got to cut him out.
Yeah, and it's we could go back and forth on it all day, because what Lionel Strong says to him is secure Corlys as an ally, and it could be one of those keep your friends close and your enemies closer things. So the question is, when he decides to marry Alicent, how much was this part of his calculation? And if it was, how far ahead is he calculating? Viserys is shocked to learn that Rhaenyra has returned from Dragonstone. He didn't even know she went there. So he speaks to her, and he kind of chides her. She's pretty unfazed. I retrieved the egg without bloodshed. And he says, I sometimes forget how alike you both were, her and her mother. Talks about how much he misses Emma, talks about how much he regrets not speaking to Rhaenyra more, sharing in their grief, and he hopes that she understands what he must now do, take on a new wife. have more kids. He explains that they're vulnerable, so he has to have more kids so they're better defended. And she goes, against whom? And he says, whomever may dare to challenge us. And that's when he adds, I do not wish to make us estranged. Rhaenyra assures that she understands. Now, I will say that I found it very naive, again, to use that word, when Rhaenyra's like, who are we defending against? And I think that comes from the fact that they've been living in peace for so long. And that is definitely something they've focused on a few times. We talked about how the knights don't have combat experience. And she showed some wisdom there, saying we want a knight that has combat experience. But it seems like that wisdom doesn't extend to the idea that we have power right now, the Targaryens, but other people want power. It's not that everyone is happy to see one of us sitting on the Iron Throne. So I found that interesting, where sometimes she's really smart, shows a lot of wisdom for her age, but clearly there's some places where she still needs to learn. This whole realm needs to grow up and learn. It's not always peace. Anything else on this scene, Daniel?
No. Let's move on to the next scene.
All right, the next day, Viserys announces that he is to take on a new wife, Alicent Hightower. And then we cut around the room to see all the different reactions.
Oh, man.
Otto couldn't be happier. Corlys is not happy. Alicent's tearing her fingers apart. And Rhaenyra looks upset, storms off.
Let's break down how it evolves, too. Right? So Viserys' line takes so long to say, and there's so many pauses, but he goes, I've selected a new wife. And then you can see Corlys perk up, and then he puts his arms on the table like he's waiting.
Yeah.
So he looks all excited. And then, Viserys pauses nervously and then makes eye contact with Rhaenyra. And Rhaenyra gives him this big smile of sad smile of it's okay, you can do this.
I understand, Dad.
But then the smile drains as she realizes, wait a minute, what I thought was going to happen seems to not be happening. All the reactions I thought in that scene were amazing.
And from Rhaenyra's standpoint, this must have come completely out of nowhere because she doesn't know about the talks that Viserys and Alicent have been having. And Rhaenyra, I think she understood how involved has she been in the conversation? Well, she knows about Laena, yeah. I think she understands the logic of why that marriage makes sense. And I love the fact that I generally try to, in my first viewing of something, I kind of watch it pretty passively, or I'm paying attention, passive in the sense that I'm not trying to guess where it's going to go next. So at no point this episode did I actually consider he might marry Alicent. I just thought he might not marry Laena. As soon as he said, I will take a new wife, and there's that long pause, I was like, oh no. I remember all of us stood up in our seats. We all started cringing before he even said it. And yeah, Rhaenyra, from her standpoint, her father just said, I'm going to marry your best friend. So it's just, and so I was asking before, is this purely an emotional decision from Viserys? I want to marry somebody I actually have feelings for. Or is this part of a calculated move against Corlys?
Well, I was going to say, before digging into it too much, I loved this scene. I thought this scene was awesome. Everybody's reactions were amazing. The tension was so good. And then I love the aftermath of just everything being blown up. Corlys storming out, Rhaenyra storming out. It was so good. As for, is this a calculated decision or emotional? I kind of have no idea. I want to say it's emotional because that's the only part of Viserys they're showing us. But also the Hightowers, they are a powerful family. I think Viserys is probably aware of how sort of manipulative and influential Otto is. Because I did think it's interesting. We don't really see much one-on-one time between the two of them. True. Right? So he's probably aware of Otto to some extent. And maybe Otto is an enemy that he also needs to secure as an ally. I just don't know. Hopefully we get to know Viserys more. What do you think?
It's definitely portrayed, I think, as emotional. When he's going to talk to everyone for advice, that is the aspect of it he most focuses on, except for the mention of Corlys looking at me with envy. So I think, like everything, it's complicated. It might be emotional, and then he rationalizes it by saying, actually, this is the logical move. I don't want to give Corlys power. So I think it's probably a little bit of both. But like you said, I want to, like every other character, I want to learn more about him.
Yeah. And then I have no issue with it because I love this scene. But why would Alicent be at this meeting? How could that have been set up in a way
Maybe
that
he
didn't seem
asked her
weird?
to be there. He was like, I want you to be there. It's going to be an awesome meeting coming up. And he asked her to be in the room. If he's going to be announcing that he's marrying her, I think he'd want her to be in the room.
Yeah, I guess it's just like, how does that not tip off everybody?
Well, I don't know what the context of this meeting was. Like, this didn't look like a small council meeting.
Yeah, they didn't put the little balls down.
Yeah, there was
right?
no balls on the table.
Okay.
So it might have just been like at work. You have sometimes these casual meetings. Hey, we're having cake in the break room later.
Yeah.
Just everyone come on.
Man, I just cannot get over, though, Corlys's reaction when he's expecting to hear good news. Like, the way he perks up and sits, like, tall at the table was so funny.
My favorite reaction was at first Otto was smiling. Then Corlys reacts very angrily. And then it cuts back to Otto, and you see him trying to sort of put on a poker face.
The eye contact the two of them make before Corlys storms out was so funny.
So good. So then Corlys makes a move. He pitches an alliance. You see, House Valerian, we never were dragon lords. We had to scratch our way, and we had to scratch out an existence from the sea.
I know what that's like, not having a dragon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeesh.
We're not so different, you and I. Both of us have had to claw our way up from low standing. Who's he talking to? Daemon. So the crab feeder's out there, right? And Viserys hasn't allowed Corlys to make a move on the Triarchy. Daemon says, it was never my brother's strong trait, my strongest trait, being king. And Corlys basically doesn't want to lose the shipping lanes. That will beggar his ports horribly. So the two of them should team up and take out the crab feeder. Helps Corlys for obvious reasons, but it would also help prove Daemon's worth. I went and solved this problem when my brother wouldn't. So, I enjoy this turn of events here. It makes things a bit more interesting. The tensions are brewing. And I love the way Game of Thrones, they do this all the time. Two people with different motivations that under certain circumstances would be enemies, but something happens to at least temporarily point them in the same direction. Love seeing that kind of thing happen. Daniel, any other thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting turn of events. I think, right, if Daemon sort of raises some type of army, right, that then goes to war, basically with the Triarchy, or maybe just with Crab Feeder, right, and we'll see how it affects the Triarchy. I imagine there's a lot of political things here that are going to take time to brew. Mm-hmm. But if he makes some type of attack against Crab Feeder with Corlys's navy, whatever, like this will be super interesting, right? He does have a dragon, so dragon's going to be involved, and then it basically creates a divide, right, in the Targaryens, right, because he's doing this without the crown's approval. Right. And then to see, okay, how do other houses react to this? It's going to be super interesting.
Yeah, I can't wait. And just hearing you talk, I started to think about, I forgot one of the best things about Game of Thrones. The battles.
Yeah.
We got to see a battle before the season's out, right?
Interesting. And we're going to be set up, I guess, for potentially big naval battles.
Yeah.
Have we seen many naval battles in Game of Thrones?
Adam, have we seen many naval battles? Yeah, I don't think he's here. So he would know the answer to that.
I don't remember.
I don't recall a lot of naval battles. No, I think there definitely were. But
I mean, we did see the Navy attack King's Landing and get like all burned up by Tyrion finding that like magic sludge in the basement.
And then the ghost pirates show up. That was Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. One other thing from that scene, I just continue to love how immature Daemon is. Mm-hmm. When Corlys says something like, I've always thought of us as similar, Daemon's response, I wasn't aware you had a king for a brother. Like he's just so literal.
Corlys says, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean literally we've gone through the exact same thing.
I'm also embarrassed to say, though, the first time I saw that scene, I was like, oh, wait, Corlys had a brother for a king? Like, I got really confused.
Daemon was talking to you. He's like, I didn't have a king for a brother, Daniel. I also enjoy the moment where Daemon is like, look, I get to say stuff about my brother, not you. Because I like that the relationship between Daemon and Viserys isn't purely antagonistic, though I would love to see some of the we kind of hear them talk about each other in non-antagonistic terms. Like, I'm not gonna, he doesn't kill his own brother, Viserys. He gives him a lot of leeway, and even when Daemon is working against him, he lets him do it. So clearly, there's love between the two of them. I guess you'd have to do a flashback to see some of that, because right now it's just there's so much tension.
Well, I think part of how we see it though is the things they're not doing.
It's true, yeah.
The other thing too is that like it makes it so much more of a tragedy, right? Is that like Daemon does not really want this, right? It feels like he's just kind of being pushed into it by external forces coming from his brother and Corlys and, you know, the whole world. Is Daemon really does seem like he just wants his brother, right? It feels like the same tragedy as sort of like Saul and Jimmy and Chuck in Better Call Saul, right? It's like these two brothers who are they're kind of forced into a conflict with each other when if they both just had the ability to reach out to each other. Like, how funny is it if the two of them could just reach out to each other and share like a genuine emotional connection? They could probably avoid a civil war.
It may save countless lives.
Right. But instead, right, all these vultures are coming, right? Corlys and all these other houses that are going to play a move, and they're going to exploit this rift in the family to their own advantage and probably to the deaths of tons of people.
Yeah. Now, I will say, I think, again, I mentioned it earlier, we make a lot of assumptions about these characters. And I think Daemon especially, we do not fully understand him. This idea that he's just trying to provoke his brother, a lot of that comes from what other people are saying about him. And it definitely comes off that way. And this move of stealing the egg comes off that way. But I want to understand his motivations better. I'm not sure we fully understand them yet. But I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, and you know, it's tricky because I want to say that my interpretation of Daemon is correct. But what's going to happen is even under sort of the system I've set up here, he's still going to get pushed into like civil war. Mm-hmm. And so we would never know, right? Like, did he want this or did he not? It'll be hard to ever really know what his motivations are. In the same way that like Rhaenyra is young, so her motivations are changing as she matures, so will Daemon's.
Right.
So it's always going to be hard to know, like, what did Daemon really want and who was he really? And, you know, we'll see who he becomes.
Oh, I found Daemon's journal here. Today I stole an egg. Here's why I did it. Cut to the crab feeder in that terrifying mask he's wearing. And of the first two episodes, this is, I would say the crab feeder is the most just villainous villain we've seen yet. We don't know any complexities about him. We don't know if he has a brother that he's trying to get his attention. He's just a guy that likes feeding people to crabs. You get the feeling that, yeah, there's the whole, you know, triarchy thing. Like, we want to carve out a little piece of this world for ourselves. But I think he's just looking for excuses to feed those crabs. He just gets off on it.
By the way, when I first saw him, it did not occur to me that he was the crab feeder. I just thought he was like one of the soldiers. I now realize that he's got to be the crab feeder. But
so, yeah, good episode. Looking forward to the next one. Any final thoughts on it, Daniel?
No, I mean, just talking about it has me a lot more excited for the next episode. Just so much cool stuff brewing. And Crab Feeder seems pretty cool. Hopefully we'll see a little more of him.
Yeah.
But maybe fewer parallelograms.
More. I want more of that. Like, I've never seen what does a foot look like, but under. You know what I mean? Like, under the, once you peel the layers of it. Now I know.
Oh, man.
All right, with that, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more. By the way, if you're watching us and you'd rather just keep us in your pocket and listen to us while you're driving around or walking around, you can find us on any podcast app, links in the description, or just search Talking Targaryen. If you are listening, check us out on YouTube if you want to watch. And Sunday nights, we always go live on YouTube right after the episode airs. So if you want to be part of those live streams, participate in the chat. That's when we do the instant take. Check out the link.
And please leave us a good review on a podcast app. Even if you didn't enjoy this, like, it really helps us a lot.
Or even just a rating. Just hit 5 stars, submit, while you're clicking links anyway. You know, I know you're all probably going to scroll through Twitter and your TikTok or whatever, sucking away hours of your life. Take 2 seconds
Don't
to go.
insult them. Yeah. We really need them to give us a good review. Please,
I take that back. Before you get back to hitting the books and studying history and just doing really smart people stuff.
Doing all the awesome stuff that you're doing.
You're probably about to listen to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History or some smart people podcast. While you're at it, leave a rating or a review.
Please.
If you want to support us, check out our Patreon. We do some exclusive content on there too. And if you want to talk to other folks, other one-takers, other Talking Targaryens,
Ners,
check out the Discord. Chatting about House of the Dragon 24/7. With that, I'm Gil.
I'm Daniel.
And this is Talkin' Targaryen.
Full take.
Pause for a second. You have an eyelash right here. Mirror image. Okay. It was distracting me. And now we can just look up the Stranger Moon as well.
Yeah.